Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode, Finding Peace in the Kitchen and at the Dinner Table with Dr. Jaclyn Albin. Do you struggle with peace at family dinners? Would you like to enjoy drama-free mealtimes? Are your children picky eaters? Our intention today is to have a discussion about how families can gather together and cook together and hopefully raise adventurous eaters. And we hope you will leave with the possibility of finding peace and presence around food and dinner and cooking. And so our special guest today is Dr. Jaclyn Albin, and she and I met at the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives conference in Napa. And she is a med-peds physician at UT Southwestern and the director of their culinary medicine program. She also is an associate professor of internal medicine and pediatrics and practices primary care and is involved with their residency training program. She's trained in lifestyle medicine and is a certified culinary medicine specialist and serves on a number of advisory boards for culinary medicine. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
And I thought it would be lovely for our listeners just to hear a little bit about how you got into culinary medicine. Before we started, I was explaining that many people who listen to this podcast are interested in culinary medicine, lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine, and how one incorporates this into a career in medicine.
I'm really passionate about that because I actually think culinary and lifestyle medicine are burnout busters.
Yes.
And we are all seeking something different, something that revitalizes not only ourselves as humans, but the way that we deliver care to our patients. And I think both can intersect in this space. So I'm really excited about how it's growing. I was into culinary medicine before it was a thing because it was personal. And that is probably the same story you'll hear from anybody who's been doing this for a long time, is there was a reason why our medical training fell short of what someone we loved needed. And for me, it was my husband and my mother. And the same year, my husband got a celiac disease diagnosis. And this is almost 15 years ago, where it was not easy to figure out what was gluten-free and what that even meant. And then my mother got a breast cancer diagnosis, and they had a very different journey where he left his physicians and came home and said, they didn't even give me a handout. What do we eat? I hope you know. And I was like, uh-oh. I was a resident at the time, but my double boarding process had not given me what I needed thus far. And then my mom actually got referred to an oncology dietitian who said, you need to change your entire dietary pattern. It's going to affect the way you heal, and it's going to reduce your risk for recurrence. And she's thankfully many years in remission and has changed her whole life because of that. And so the power of introducing the role that food plays into our health journeys when you're vulnerable and sick can transform someone's future. So that's really what brought me to this, was them.
Yeah, and I think that's so true for many physicians who, when the healthcare system lets us down, we go into things that help us address that. And I tell very vulnerably in this podcast that when my husband developed severe depression, that's how I got into coaching and mindfulness and all of those things, because that's what helped me get through it with my teenagers and all my leadership roles. And it made a huge difference. And we're going to talk about nutrition. And as a pediatrician, I had 3 children and was a working mom, and my husband was working full time. And like, I actually had to come up with all kinds of strategies. And what I noticed was that that was what I talked about in most of my pediatric visits, were the strategies that I had found, and sharing those blended with some of this new sort of mindfulness and mindset work, which when we change the energy we bring to the conversation. So
Yeah, that's what makes it real. Our patients are looking for that authenticity. And I think historically in medicine, it's like you're the doctor and you're not necessarily telling your personal
yeah.
stories, but patients are so desirous of hearing what really works and seeing that we struggle. And I'll never forget one time I shared a struggle with getting one of my children to eat something or do something. I can't remember the whole context, but at the end of it, my patient said, "You're a real person who has dirty laundry piles too, aren't you?" And it was like this moment for her where she realized, I'm not giving you advice as somebody who has it figured out. I'm in the trenches with you. And what I bring to you is through my own blood, sweat, and tears. And I think when we do that with our patients, there's something so humanizing about food.
Yeah.
You bring it to, we all have to figure out what's for dinner tonight.
Yeah. And one of the things we talk about in this podcast a lot is how we were trained to show up and how that influences our life choices and influences our experience of our life. And so it's interesting because we were taught when I went to med school to not be vulnerable and not share anything about your experience and not share your humanity. And yet what we're both sharing here is when it's one of the most powerful tools we have as a physician when it comes to food in particular, because as you mentioned, food's so personal. And for them to see that we struggle with this
Yeah.
is incredibly helpful in whether people are trying to change diet or lose weight or change for specific disease diagnoses.
I mean, vulnerability, I think, is the core need that we all have, is to connect with another person that's struggling in a similar way, because then you realize you didn't just miss the memo.
Yeah,
It's just hard.
yeah,
And then that's what the truth about food, right? It's just hard. And so how we do that in modern society, it's swimming upstream. And I think when we normalize the struggle and we normalize that, I mean, as physicians, we know how to look stuff up in a language. That's what I tell the
yeah.
students. You don't have to know everything in this language. You know how to use the dictionary in evidence-based medicine.
Mhm.
If you can apply that to food and nutrition, now you can learn that, but you weren't taught that. So once we build that skill to look stuff up, the application is a whole different layer. And you can know something, but the actual doing it in your busy everyday life, that's really where we have to all help each other.
And that strikes me as exactly what you're doing as you're teaching culinary medicine and running this program is it's much more practical applications. How did you get UT Southwestern to give you this role?
Well, jokingly, I assigned it to myself.
I love
And sometimes that's what you do. You just
it. Yeah,
do the thing.
yeah.
Now, big medical systems and universities have so many priorities, but one of them is to train the next generation and to do it well and to do it in a way that resonates with them. So I always find for anybody who has learners, whether it's medical students, PAs, residents, fellows, if you start with the learner population and you're bringing something that's evidence-based and fun, it's hard for it not to be a win. So the biggest struggle that most people have had in bringing this into medical education is funding, and it is ultimately led by a lot of really passionate volunteers.
Mhm.
But I think we're starting to see the shift there. And I even in my institution, our graduate medical education programs, they use some of their discretionary funds to pay for their residents and fellows to go through culinary medicine. So we're bringing them together, and I'm able to pay a dietitian for her time, and I'm able to get a food that feeds everyone a meal. And so we have a long way to go, but I'm really grateful to see that people are investing in this, because when we all come together and we intersect what we know about nutrition, what we know about medicine and how food affects health, and then what we know about culinary literacy, because you have to make it taste good. We're not talking about nasty food. It's delicious food. And when you open the door to, hey, nourishing food can also be delightful, people are listening.
Mhm.
And it's not my dietitian partner always says, do not deliver the plate with an apology. You're bringing something beautiful that maybe they haven't tried before, but how you market it, and this goes back to even how we parent around food, how you market it goes a long way.
Oh, for sure. And I will say, actually, I'm going to hats off to my husband who, when he first started cooking for my retreats, he was not cooking vegetarian, plant forward. He didn't sign up for that, but that's what he does now. And he does entire, gluten-free retreats when someone has celiac or I always say a medical condition because we don't tend to change it just for preferences. But
Mhm.
his approach about food is to make it taste amazing and also look beautiful because he trained with Wolfgang Puck years ago, and it was about tasting with your eyes, which I want to share with you as a way of, when something is beautiful, you already taste it before you eat it. And so what I find is people come and they say, I had no idea that the food could taste, vegetarian food could taste this good, or plant forward food could taste this good and look this good. And it's almost like unwrapping a present. And so I think with our kids too, that's where the kid version is maybe the pancakes that have, blueberry smiley faces in them, or, how do you make it appealing and interesting, or dips, or, things like that. But I love this idea that we have to make it something that people sell it. It's marketing.
Yeah, it has to be enjoyable. I mean, there's so much that's a struggle in life that anything that can be made a little bit easier and a little bit prettier, most of us appreciate that. So I'll even say one of the things that comes to mind as a key strategy is just an open mind. And we as adults often put on children things that they didn't actually choose themselves. And you can even think about parenting around hard topics. So let's not even talking about food, but if we're talking about you're teaching your children about how to engage people that are different, how to talk about conflict when there's more than one situation going on in our world. And we have to parent that by listening to their questions and answering their questions without necessarily editorializing or giving them all the answers that we would have. And the same is true of food. If they ask about something, you don't have to tell them more than that, and you also shouldn't write their story for them. And so it's about letting them decide. And my favorite way of doing that is kid charcuterie, which means you just put it out there and you don't police who eats what. And I have a junior high boy at my house, and that's a special time in one's life to be a 12 or 13-year-old
Yes.
boy.
Yes.
And he'll bring his friends over, and I will always say, what would you like me to serve? And whatever he says, I will have some of that. And maybe it's pizza, and maybe it's a certain treat. And then I will also have a giant charcuterie of fruits and vegetables and guacamole and hummus. And guess what? All the food is gone every time. And I don't know who ate all the cucumbers or who had the carrots or the bell peppers, whatever. But if you make it not a requirement or an expectation, and you're not supervising it, we give them the autonomy to say, I choose to have this, and it's normalized. And so I think as parents, one of the hardest things we have to do, especially those of us who are physicians and we like to control outcomes,
Yes, we do.
we have to say, hands off. That's their story. You offer and set it out. They get to decide whether or not it goes in their body, but you made it beautiful and you made it easy for them to say yes.
I love that. And I was telling you, I have these now 3 young adult boys, but when they get hungry, they actually do start trying things and eating things. And I think you mentioned this in your workshop at Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives, the power of peer pressure. And so using that as a tool for you, where someone else is like, oh, I love cucumbers, and your child might never eat a cucumber. But when the other child's eating them, they might try.
Many of my parents of pediatric patients will tell me, my child eats things at daycare that they never eat at home. They tell
Yes.
me that they eat this at daycare.
Yeah.
And so it's exactly that. It's that when I think that they're expecting to be able to behave differently around us as parents. They'll often eat differently for a caregiver or a grandparent than they even do for us as parents. And part of that is the expectations that we put on them. So I think that when we want to see our children's food relationship change, we have to check ourselves at the door. What is our relationship with food? Are we projecting any of that on them? And are we trying to control them excessively? And that starts in infancy and toddlerhood, where we know responsive feeding, which is responding to a child's cues, works a lot better than authoritarian parenting.
Yeah. That is such a powerful, I mean, it brings you back to breastfeeding, right? Because you don't know how much they're getting and you can't keep track. And so they just feed on demand. And yet I always said we unteach how to eat when you're hungry. And so could we
Right.
actually believe that they would eat when they're hungry and not when they're not? Because I don't know a kid who will actually starve themselves totally, right? They might be skinny, but they're not going to starve themselves. One thought that comes to mind is another thing that physicians really struggle with, and I struggled with this, is trusting. We were sort of taught not to trust and not to believe that it's going to turn out okay. You know, for our patients, we can't just assume it's going to turn out okay. We have to get in there and meddle and make sure it turns out okay and have all the more than guardrails, right? Really fix, manage, control it. And then we do that with food. But what if we believed that our kids were going to turn out good eaters in the end? And that if we trusted that, we would probably bring a totally different energy to the dinner table.
So I'm going to bring my med-peds hat to this
Yeah.
one because it's really fascinating. And one of my roles as an associate residency program leader is helping residents navigate the cultural differences of pediatric training and adult training.
Yes.
And there's this, sometimes we get in trouble in pediatrics as med-peds residents because we do things that we didn't ask to do without permission because we just kind of go for it. And then on the adult side, we might try to micromanage a little too much because we're used to doing that in pediatrics. And so I think we have to really step back and say, we have so little control. The best we can do is hope to empower, inspire, and educate. And so if you can take a family or a child and you can say, I'm trying to help you understand the connection between food and health. And so I'm educating you, I'm giving you resources that are appropriate for your age. And I'm inspiring you that this is going to help you connect the dots in what you care about. I always talk to adolescents about what they care about, whether it's music or sports or something else, academics, and that food is fuel for that. So if you help them see that maybe you're putting the wrong kind of gas in the car to be the very best pianist or football player or theater major, you connect it back to something they care about, and then you empower them. Because I mean, even as a parent, not speaking as a pediatrician, I'm well aware that once my kids are in middle school, I have very little control over their choices anymore. We think we do, but we really don't. And the sooner we let go and empower them to make good choices, but to also tell you honestly when they feel like they messed up and to not be judged for it, that's powerful, because that's all we really want in our own lives as adults too, right? Is to be able to mess up sometimes and be able to be vulnerable about it and try again.
And I'm thinking our medicine training tells us it's not okay to make mistakes. And so I
Mm,
think we think it's not okay to make mistakes on our own health, right? And we have that regret and judgment. But as parents, we double, triple that because we care and we're worried and we love. And so I think that a lot of that energy then comes to the feeding conversation and it
yeah,
makes it much harder.
it
Something
does.
that's harder.
Well, and I think that's why it's powerful for us as adults, in whatever role we're playing professionally, to be honest about our own mistakes, because it gives permission to change the culture there. And I mean, we do call it practicing medicine. So we're practicing because we're never going to arrive. And that journey, that messy life journey, is part of the beauty. And I think we have to embrace that. And yeah, it's hard and scary. When we make a mistake at work, it could hurt someone. And I think that's part of why we try to set up systems where there's lots of checkpoints, there's lots of layers, and one person's mistake is rarely going to lead to a bad outcome because we have so many checkpoints. And then when we try to do that at home, we overly checkpoint natural processes like sleep and eating and other things. And so, I think healing our own relationship with food is so important if we want to heal other people's relationship with food. And a lot of us have an unhealthy relationship with food that we need to think through and address, and
And
sometimes get
what's,
help for.
yeah, I was going to say, what's your best tip for that? Get help with it if you really struggle, obviously, but
Well, I think the first step is many people don't realize that our childhood experiences, history of any kind of trauma,
Mhm.
often manifest in a dysfunctional relationship with food, and it may not even be related to food. So, a common misconception, I did some work in child welfare in my early years, and just because a child had food insecurity for a time doesn't necessarily mean that they have a manifestation of food trauma. But food is a comfort to us. So if we're using food as a comfort for unaddressed stress and trauma, then we're going to develop a dysfunctional racial relationship, just like with alcohol or any other substance that we might use to comfort us. So I think that is one of the things we hope to teach children is eat when you're hungry, but not, not when you're just feeling sad. And so, how do we build that skill set? We have to ask ourselves, am I actually hungry?
yeah. Yeah. And
Or do
we
I
were
need the
trained, of
comfort?
course, that we're not hungry because it's not time to eat in medicine in particular,
Yeah.
right? Eat as much as you
Yeah.
can, as fast as you can. And I also think when our basic needs are not being met, like go back to
Mhm.
residency,
Mm,
that's where we develop this very dysfunctional relationship with
yes.
food. I used to give to myself a sandwich for every consult I got in the ER when I was on call. Because it was, it was a only thing you could get in the middle of the night. And it was like a little game that made me feel better. That's not very healthy strategy. But I think that many of us do that. And we use
Mm.
that when you're really tired, for example. We'll eat a lot more because we don't even know what we want because we're so tired. And I think we're taught to turn off our sort of inner knowing of what our body needs. We don't need to go to the bathroom. We don't need to eat. We don't need a rest. We don't need a break.
It's deny. Oh, I remember cramming granola bars down in the bathroom on surgery rotations in
Yeah.
medical school because you might not eat for 12 hours. Yeah, and I frankly, we have to find a balance there where there will be times when you have to deny yourself because you are taking care of someone in their most vulnerable moment if you're a physician, or I would say other professions as well. But then we also have to say, my patient can wait 2 more minutes for me to go to the bathroom or to eat something, and telling people our human needs. I even am vulnerable with my patients about that. Thanks for waiting for me. I didn't get a lunch break today, so I just took 5 minutes so that my brain would be fully with you when I showed up.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's true. We can't function without that
Yeah.
fuel, and we definitely should not expect children to do that.
Yes, for sure. So, what do you think are the keys to developing a healthy, I'll say, family
Mm.
relationship with
Yeah.
mealtime, dinner time, or even cooking?
So I think there's two different answers if you're early days starting out versus if you already have some habits that you wish you could change. And so we'll
Okay.
start with the early
Yeah.
days. If someone is pregnant or nursing or in the early years of toddlerhood, the most important thing is that you try to be together for at least one meal a day where you're all there and devices are not. And that's hard. But when you set that boundary, it actually doesn't come up repeatedly anymore. And
Mhm.
like my children know everyone's devices away at dinner. Mom and dad aren't on their phone either. And we're just there. And if somebody really needs to reach us, they can call. And it's going to be okay for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I think disengaging from devices so that we're actually fully present,
Mhm.
that's what allows us to have that positive relationship with food and with the meal experience. So young children, it's not fun. They're throwing food on the floor. It's in their hair. And you're just sort of weathering the storm to try to create good habits for later. But then later it can become delightful when those good habits are built in the early years. And I always point parents in those early days to Ellen Satter's advice about the division of responsibility. You provide the what, the where, and the when. So this is on the menu at 6 p.m. at the table. And then the child of any age determines the whether and the how much. And when you take battleground off, we're not having a battle about it. This is just it. This is what's on the menu. And people always ask me, well, what do you do if they don't eat that? Well, we always have fruit and nuts. I'm not making you anything else, but you can have some
Yeah.
pecans and an apple if you're not going to eat dinner. And as you said earlier, most children without a medical reason will eventually eat. If they do not, they have a severe feeding disorder that needs treatment. But 95% of children, they're not going to starve themselves. If they truly refuse to eat everything, then you need special support. But then if you already have habits that aren't awesome, I think any child over the age of 4 should have input on how we do better. So you have a family meeting and you say, hey, we have some regrets about how we've done this and we would like to do better. And here are some of the ideas we have. We'd like to hear your ideas. Let's pick a couple things. So just how you would get a patient to change behavior. You make a SMART goal. 3 days a week, we're going to sit at the table for 30 minutes and we're not going to be on our devices while we eat. Even if we're having takeout, we're going to have this meal together. And then over time, maybe then you bring in, let's engage each member of the family. At my house, my kids are in charge of choosing a dinner menu item once a week, making the grocery list for that, and then helping cook it. Now, my older child is able to pretty independently prepare it. My younger child is more of a sous chef, but it's building the skill set that you can think about food, plan food, your opinion about what we eat as a family is valued. And that can be a great way to start. Hey, can you help us choose what we're going to eat for dinner? And then you have to be practical. You have to look at your schedule. You have to say, oh, we have soccer practice until 6:30. We're not going to make that hour-long dish this night. That's a weekend dish. Can we have leftovers this night? Can we throw something together in 20 minutes? And you build those skills over time. And then the last thing, I never thought I would say this. AI is a really great tool for, I have 20 minutes, I have canned beans, leftover greens, chicken breast, some broth. What can I make? And
That
it will
is
literally,
such a creative idea.
I'm not even joking. And I don't even use a paid version, just any of the free versions. It throws together some decent recipes. Now, I wouldn't put them on a restaurant menu until you've tested it,
Yeah.
but it's a great way to just take the mental energy out. And we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. We can use resources that are already there.
Oh, I love that. And I'm thinking too, our approach as the parent to cooking, like I know from so many people, they feel so stressed about the cooking. And so then that's the energy that kids get, is that cooking is stressful. I know I hear this time and time again from people who come to retreats. They're like, your husband is just so present and he's just enjoying it. And like, that's what he grew up watching because his mom loved to cook. I did not grow up that way. Nobody in my family liked to cook. And so I see making dinner as a chore. And that's directly from witnessing what other people do. And so I think being intentional about what we model to the degree that we can, it's the perfect opportunity to practice mindfulness, right? Presence when you're cooking, and can you at least be present in that moment? I think would be a really powerful place that all of us could start to change the conversation around cooking in our houses.
Well, there's mindfulness in every step of it, right? There's mindfulness in saying this matters enough that I'm going to slow down and plan what we're going to eat. And everything's less stressful if there's a plan. And you might not always stick to the plan. You might throw it out the window. I got home late from a kid's doctor's visit yesterday and threw out my original plan because it was going to take too long. And that's okay, right? But when we start with a plan, we're a little more prepared. Then you think about the fact that I get to choose if there's music in my kitchen. I get to choose if this is a gathering place where everyone's doing their homework and we're talking about our day. And then cutting vegetables requires a bit of focus so that you keep all your fingers intact. And I love teaching my kids about dicing vegetables. Like, we have to give our full attention to this. And there's actually something very fun about, I'm trying to cut a uniform size of carrot slice here, and it's a bit of an art form. So being present in the preparation of even a vegetable, I think we have to give ourselves permission to slow down, and it might not feel productive, but it's actually taking a deep breath. It's enjoying the slightly misshapen carrot from nature and the beauty that it's going to bring to my food. It's even thinking about the nutrition it's going to bring to my family. You know, there's so much that's mindful about it. And then to the point you made, making it beautiful with when you're actually eating it. How can I serve this? And okay, I have to give a cute story. Today, my daughter made a smoothie with her babysitter, and I was running downstairs to grab lunch. And she comes running in from the backyard where we have a lot of fresh herbs, and she puts a mint leaf on top of the smoothie that she's giving to her brother. And I'm thinking that's it. She's seen there's beauty in
Yes.
adding that garnish, and that the
Yeah.
experience of delivering the smoothie was
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
because of it. And so it's a silly little story, but those are the kinds of things we want to teach them. That extra moment brought joy.
Yeah, I love that. And it can even be almost an art project. I used to think of myself as not creative. And now I think podcasting is creative, and I teach yoga and that's creative. And I do all kinds of things that are creative, but I didn't have this idea. I thought creativity was art or music.
Mhm.
And yet I think food is creativity, and creating it and making it beautiful is another form of creativity. And the way that you serve it is creativity.
When we started out talking a bit about burnout and
Yeah.
maybe looking
Yeah.
for how do you bring something new, medicine is so science focused that the art of food that is relevant to everyone because we have to eat, it's a great way to pair art and science. And I think the two together can be really fun when the science win is also an art win at the same time.
Yes. Well, and that's what culinary medicine is all about.
Absolutely. And so I love thinking outside the silo of Dr. Brain.
Mhm.
And culinary medicine brings dietitian nutritionists, it brings chefs, but it also brings unexpected people like physical therapists and occupational and speech pathologists and others to the table who have expertise around how we experience food. And then we teach this in a kitchen and everyone eats. Nobody feels sad when they come to a class, whether it's a resident coming or a patient coming to a group medical visit. If you get served food and you get to try lots of new things, no one's sad about that. And so bringing it together into our educational strategy and also into our patient care, I have never left feeling so energized. And so when I do a group medical visit, which I think is one of the ways that we can best incorporate culinary medicine into clinical practice, you can bring 12 to 16 patients, depending on your space, into a group context and do a hands-on cooking class. My dietitian leads this portion of it, and then we're integrating this into the care plan. So we're thinking about how this affects your either things you want to prevent or current metabolic and other diseases that you might have. We're going to teach people how to do this at home, how to eat out less, how to make food delicious and simple and affordable. And then they're going to eat the food that they made. They're going to talk about it, and then they're going to share their stories with each other. That is a billable medical care visit. And you can bill 12 to 16 patients as my comfort zone at a time. And guess what? I left an afternoon of clinic feeling energized rather than exhausted. And I think that's a really great way to transform. There's a lot of us who are trying to get in the literature how to do this so that people see the potential. We don't have a teaching kitchen for patients. I use community partner kitchens. So I actually built relationships with a couple of the large churches in our area, and we lease their kitchen spaces, and it brings in the community voice to everything we're doing as well. So I think it's something that's really scalable, even if someone doesn't have a facility where they can bring this directly to patients.
That is, I love that you sort of lay that out there. The thing that came to mind as you were saying it, as I'm like, that's the same recipe for a happy, healthy family meal, right? You cook together, you take joy in it, you talk about it, you share your stories, you eat the food you made, and you bring this sort of positive energy about how this is helping you move through the world in positive ways and healthier ways. And
Well,
it
when
was
there's
a
so
direct
much.
parallel.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you've noticed that.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that before, but it's also there's so much negativity and
Yeah.
difference that we're focused on in society right now. This is where literally no matter where you're from or who you are, or how old you are, you care about your food experience.
Yeah.
And it's a way to gather and to bring ourselves and to connect with others and bring positivity to our day. And medicine is, in many ways, we are bearing the brunt of the checkbox era of everything is a metric and everything is measured. And you can't measure the magic of combating loneliness with a group patient appointment, where you see patients giving each other what you can't give them. And one of my patients that recently is graduating from our cohort, we do a 6-class series actually for culinary medicine, and they come once every 1 to 3 weeks and do a class, and then they work on building skills and goals in between. And she came back and she said her workout class has asked her to come bring every recipe and demo the samples of what she's learning so they can try it too. And I just thought that's exactly what you want, where someone feels empowered and changed, and then they're carrying it forward to a new community and building more positive energy around that. Food does that in such a great way.
I love that. And we can also cultivate that same food experience at home. Like that's within our power if we want, or we can choose to focus on the negative and why kids are
Yeah.
throwing their food and what's wrong and why they're not eating, and resist the reality
Mm.
of
Well, and
toddlers, etc.
it's okay to set boundaries.
Yeah.
I think especially working parents sometimes feel guilty about the things we might miss, or how we're not always as fully present as parents who maybe aren't working outside the home, and will feel like I just need to let my kid have this because they deserve it or because I was home late. But the reality is they're going to struggle their whole life with food if we don't set the right framework. And those boundaries, children want boundaries. My adolescent children want screen time boundaries, whether or not they know it. They want bedtime boundaries and they want food boundaries. And I'm sorry, this is not your favorite, and I will put less curry powder in there next time. But this is what we're having. Could we try to dilute it with a little bit of yogurt? Could we try, can you find a strategy that helps them make it work? Because our children's success as adults has everything to do with their ability to walk through uncomfortable things and find a way forward. And that's true, and it's modeled at the dinner table.
Yeah. So what are your tips for this piece in gathering and the kitchen and the dinner table?
Yeah. I think the big one for me was creating a standard where we do our homework downstairs. I don't want my kids all over the house in different rooms with a device. I want them in the room that I'm in. And if they're kind of at each other, we'll put them at different parts of the room. You sit over there, you sit over there. And then we're talking about our day. And if I'm in the middle of preparing food and somebody has a question, I'm going to pause. And we talked earlier about kids' charcuterie. I think one of the biggest stressors is this sense of urgency to get the meal done before everyone loses their mind because they're hangry.
Yes.
And so that is what I actually do first is I set out a tray of sliced fruits and veggies, usually with some kind of dip, store-bought guacamole for the win. And you just set it out there. And if someone's hungry, oh, yep, there's a few things for you to nibble on. We're going to be all right. You can wait 20 more minutes. And it helps create this culture that it's worth waiting for the meal, but we're also filling our body with positive things while we're waiting for the meal. And so that can take a little bit of the edge off if you have an appetizer that actually gets in a serving of fruits and veggies right at the beginning. And then not trying to overburden yourself or set unrealistic expectations. So if you're not cooking at home at all, you don't start cooking 5 days a week. You start cooking 2 days a week. And you ask yourself, can I double this? Can we make tomorrow easier because we're making more today? And 1 day a week, we have smorgasbord leftovers, which means there's 2 servings of this and 1 serving of that. And everybody gets to pick from the option of all the leftovers. And once you normalize, we're going to eat the food we have. We don't want to waste food. Then we're not going to pick up takeout, because we're going to use that money on vacation instead. And we're going to make sure we don't contribute to the food waste problem that is rampant. We waste about half the food in this country.
Yeah.
And
we
most
model
of it
that
is
for our
produce.
children by not eating the leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
I love this idea of also getting out of maybe, we were taught you have to wait for dinner. And so just making up your own rules that work for your family. I remember when I was growing up, I have a much younger brother who's 12 years younger. And my mom used to feed him before everyone else got home from sports, all the healthy food. And then he would just come join us. And I think he had dessert while the rest of us were eating. But he still had to join us, but he could not wait for everyone to get home from basketball and tennis and school and all the things. And then that it turned out fine.
Yeah,
And
that's
I think
okay.
you just have to get creative, right? That's
And individualize the needs that each kid has. And you may know this kid has to get to bed on time, or they're going to fall apart. And so I think we have to maintain a sense of flexibility, lack of rigidity within healthy boundaries. And so each story and family is going to be different. And I also want to speak briefly to the fact that other people might not agree or understand. And that might be grandma or your mother-in-law,
Yeah.
or it might be a friend, another kid's parent. I actually have a bit of a reputation where other parents will always check with me before serving desserts to my children because they know we're really intentional about our sugar intake. And I never say no when another parent is wanting to serve my child something that the other children in the home are eating, because I don't try to regulate that.
Yeah.
I am the nutritional gatekeeper at my home,
Yeah.
but I may not have that food in my house, but I'm not going to regulate that for someone else or pass judgment. And that helps your children see we don't have to think so rigidly about this. I should not feel shame that I chose to indulge in something for pleasure, because most of the time I'm at home eating the carrot sticks.
Yeah. And I found that my kids, when they went out into the world, they did not really appreciate the culinary experience they had at home, thanks to my husband, not me. But they went out in the world, and now they're asking. They call my husband all the time, how do I cook this? Because they're like, nobody else cooks like you. Like, people don't eat like this. How do I do that? And so I think also not insisting that they learn and insisting that they be able to do it, but that they enjoy. I think that when we grow up in a family where we're eating good food, we like feeling good. And then we go out and start eating crap food and we don't feel good. And then it's like, oh, maybe I want to change. Or maybe when I had that thing at someone else's house, it didn't make me feel good. And there's learning in that. And that's amazing.
Oh, and everyone has to have their own journey. We can't, I think as parents, we always wish we could save our children from pain, but you can't, because they don't actually grow or develop resilience without having to find these hard lessons. What you described, that's what every parent wants, is they come back to you when they're ready.
Yeah.
They come back to you because they know
Yeah.
they're ready to hear it now. And so we should never think it's too late, and never believe that even if there's a lot of bad habits and there's teenagers in the home and they're pretty much on their own, they're going to come back, but they can always see us care enough about ourselves to continue to grow. So I think we have to have a growth mindset about this. It's not too late for me. It's not too late to do better. We were eating a lot of McDonald's before my husband got diagnosed with celiac disease, because we were on a resident and med student salary. And I think you can transform everything when you learn more, you do better.
Yeah, I
But
love
you
that.
don't pass judgment on yourself, just like you wouldn't judge a friend.
Yeah. The growth mindset and it being a long game, and the stepping out of judgment, as in medicine, most of us are pretty judgy people. We were trained to judge ourselves. We were trained to judge our colleagues. We even judge our patients. And for those people listening, I had a whole 45-minute podcast on judgment in medicine, which is one of the most listened to podcasts.
Wow.
I think of it as kind of depressing, right? Because I'm like, this is how we judge ourselves. This is how we judge our colleagues, and a whole section on how we judge our patients with the language that we use about they deny and they complain of, and they have incompetent body parts, and they fail to thrive, progress, all these things, right? Like if you just think about that language.
Yeah.
But I think we bring that same judgment to food, and the way that whether we are not doing a good enough job feeding our children, or we didn't do a good enough job feeding ourselves, or and so could we just step out of judgment and decide, like, going forward, take that hands wide open mindfulness approach of like, okay, well, here we are today. What do we want to do going forward?
I love that you just said hands wide open, because that to me is where we find the most peace in life, is when we hold everything with a more open hand. The outcome is not really in my control. The choice that someone else makes is not really in my control. And when you let go of that, what's next for us in our career, if we live in the same state that we're in now, what's going to happen? The anxiety starts to melt away if we accept our lack of control. And that a lot of that is just living in the present moment and saying that's all we have. I have a dear friend who just lost her husband at a young age to cancer. And when you see people go through those things, you realize we have no guarantees. We have this moment. And how can I make the people around me feel connected and cared for in this moment? So much of that can be done through food.
I think that's a beautiful spot to end. Through food and peaceful family dinners and kitchens. And I love this word gathering, because I think if the focus is on the gathering and the connection and the You mentioned the, use a different word, but anti-loneliness. I can't think of, right?
Yeah.
If that were our focus and the food were something that also happened, but that wasn't the focus, that would be a powerful way of moving forward in the world.
Completely agree.
Any final words you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I think anytime you listen to something like this that may make you a little uncomfortable or desire to change, don't make a 10-item to-do list. Just pick one thing that you would like to start with and talk to your stakeholders, even if they're 5 years old, to get input because it has to be a whole of family approach when we want to change culture, and it's messy. And be real and authentic about it's hard. Hey, I always say to my kids, I will apologize to you when I make a mistake and when I want to do better because we want to be honest. And I didn't like how I handled this, and I want us to do better as a family. Here are my ideas. So I think you start with that. You have a circle, you have a meeting of the minds, and you pick one or two small things to do better, and that tends to have a trickle effect. We know that habit change research shows one small change has a huge impact. So start small and it can lead to big things.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today. So many pearls of wisdom in there and a lot of mindfulness coming up as usual, again, in everything that we do, being intentional and patient and present. So many opportunities to sort of pause and slow down around our approach to food and our approach to families and approach to our children. So much gratitude to you for joining us. And we will, I'm certain, meet again at some point in the future.
I look forward to it.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes, and please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.